Hey there, Ryan Reynolds here. It's a new year, and you know what that means. No, not the diet. Resolutions. A way for us all to try and do a little bit better than we did last year. And my resolution, unlike big wireless, is to not be a raging and raise the price of wireless on you every chance I get. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes on unlimited. See mintmobile.com for details.
The NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's $300 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. 21 plus and present in select states. First online real money wager only. $5 first deposit required. Bonus issued as non-withdrawable bonus bets which expire 7 days after receipt. Restrictions apply. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER.
On today's Film and Whiskey, I'm talking with our friend Daniel Joyaux about the Oscar nominations. Then we're throwing over to an old friend in Old Line Spirits to talk about what it means that American Single Malt is now an officially designated category of whiskey. That's all ahead on the Film and Whiskey podcast. Well, hey everybody, welcome into another special bonus episode of Film and Whiskey. I'm Bob Book, and I am flying solo this evening on Oscar nominations night. Folks, if you pay any attention to the Oscars, you know that this is about the second biggest day in the Oscar season. The nominations have been announced. They were delayed by about a week from the fires that are raging through LA, but we finally got the Oscar nominations. There are definitely some surprises. There are definitely some omissions, I would say. I don't like using the word snub, and maybe I'll get into that with our guest today, but we're bringing back on our resident Oscar critic, Indiana Pacers fan, and current, fifth place member of our Film and Whiskey fantasy basketball. Third place in fantasy basketball. It's our friend. I'm
beating Brad right now.
Oh, perfect. That's what everybody wants. It's our friend Daniel Joyaux. Daniel, how are you?
I'm good. How about yourself? Sorry for the interruption. You're so good.
No. Listen, I need to do fact checking for my intros. I was going off vibes and gut feel, and it's important that we get the records and draft order straight for our fantasy basketball for next year. So thank you for the correction. Daniel's joining us this evening, A, because he's a great guy and I like talking to him, but B, he just wrote a piece for RogerEbert.com today about the Oscar nominations. He's been writing pieces for the last couple weeks leading up to the Oscars. He is our resident Oscar critic, and he knows a lot more about this stuff than I do. So we're going to pick Daniel's brain a little bit. I guess let's start with this, Daniel. Looking back on 2024 as a movie year, and I don't want to hear you just say the movie critic thing, which is like every year is a good year for movies, if you know where to look. Was 24 a good year for movies or not?
Yes, because every year is a good year for movies. 2024 was not as good of a year as 2023, which is the most obvious comparison because those are the last 2 years. 2023, I think, legitimately had the single best picture lineup we've probably ever had, or at the very least, the best since 1975.
Mm-hmm.
So it's easy to look at 2024 and say, well, the previous year was better. And yeah, that's true, but that's because the previous year was abnormally great.
That's fair. And I do think that it's a little bit unfair for me to be comparing it so much to 23 when you have films like Oppenheimer, like The Holdovers, like Anatomy of a Fall or Past Lives. But I just couldn't help but think through most of my movie viewings this year, like, damn, if The Holdovers had just held out for one more year, it could have absolutely dominated everything this year. It feels like a year that was ripe for something to come along and really assert itself. And I would say pretty much every movie that's been in contention this year is either too divisive to get that consensus, or the consensus around it has just been that it's like an 8 out of 10 and not anything better than that. I just don't feel like we had anything break through as an all-timer movie this year.
Well, I have a question about what you just said, and this could be that it's not an either or, it could be a both things are true at once. But I wonder, are the films actually divisive, or have people just gotten more divisive in their reactions to things?
Yeah, you know what? I think that this year is probably a banner year for film Twitter steering award season more than maybe any other year. Yeah. And I think my example, this is complete conjecture and conspiracy theory now, but when Dune Part 2 came out early in the year, end of February, early March, I think is when that movie came out. And it was just getting so much love and appreciation and awards prognosticators saying like it's going to dominate the Oscars. And then within about a month, you started hearing, well, I wonder if the Academy is going to honor this film because historically they haven't nominated second chapters in a trilogy and maybe they'll hold off. And I felt like it almost became a self-fulfilling prophecy that enough people told Academy members through their various channels and podcasts and everything else, hey, you probably won't nominate this, that it ended up not really getting any nominations. I'm truly shocked, especially with Dune and the studio behind it, that it has not made more of an awards push this season.
Yeah, I mean, it got Best Picture and it got a handful of craft categories. I think it ended up with 5 or 6 nominations. Mm-hmm. I think a few things are happening there. I mean, first of all, I think that I apologize if I'm not remembering the timeline correctly, but I think that when Dune Part 2 came out, there wasn't a third yet. And it was like a week later that then they announced the third movie. And so I think what may be happening there is that people thought it would be a major Oscar player because people thought it was movie 2 out of 2. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden it became movie 2 out of 3. And so people rolled back their expectations. I would also say that, well, yeah, you're right that people were saying that in March. Anyone saying that in March is just wrong because you can never say any movie is going to dominate the Oscars in March because we don't know what the contenders are going to be yet. Yeah. It's like me predicting who's going to win the NBA title 3 years from now when I don't know who the rosters of any teams are going to be.
Right. Well, there's a movie that I think won the audience award this year at, was it Sundance? It was called The Life of Chuck.
Yeah, that was at Toronto. I saw that at Toronto. I really liked it.
It got great reviews and it just got held. It never came out this year. I ended up, we participate in this thing for Vulture called the Movies Fantasy League. I ended up drafting it for my team because it was a steal because no one knew if it was going to get released. But I think that just goes to show, even towards the end of the season, in September, we had no idea if somebody was going to pick this up and try to give it a push for Oscar season.
Yeah.
All right, Daniel, let's get into talking about the nominations themselves. So this is where I wish we had Brad present because Brad, a host of a movie podcast, is, I think, a pretty good gauge of what the average person's knowledge of the field looks like. He doesn't go seeking out what are the Oscar movies for me to see this year. He kind of lets it come to him. And what I've found increasingly over the last 5-6 years is that even smaller movies, which would have gotten some level of marketing, are getting next to nothing now. And so people like Brad, we'll get to January, February, and he'll say, I've never heard of this film before. And the only reason that I've heard of it is because I spend too much of my time on film Twitter. And so I'll have things placed on my radar by people in New York and LA, and they'll say, keep an eye out for this, and it'll eventually come out. But as I look through this list of Best Picture nominees, I don't know how many of these the average person will have had any engagement with.
Yeah, I think that's true on the face of it. I mean, it's a correct statement to say that most people will not have heard of most of these movies. I do think that there's an element of people not making themselves available to hear about things anymore. Mm-hmm. I mean, it used to be the way we heard about movies was because we watched TV and we would see movie trailers. Yeah. Well, now we don't see movie trailers on TV anymore. So realistically, how are people finding out about new movies? If you don't ever expose yourself to something with commercials, then what do you realistically expect to happen? How do you expect to encounter movie trailers? Mm-hmm. And if you don't go to movies because you don't know what's out, then you also aren't seeing trailers in front of other movies.
Yeah. So do you still think that at the root of it, this is an issue with consumers and the way we consume things more than it is an advertiser issue and the way that they're targeting people?
Well, I think part of what you're talking about is the sort of relationship between the Oscars and box office. And traditionally, when something gets nominated for a lot of Oscars, it gets a huge box office boost. So a lot of films want to be in theaters when the Oscar nominations happen. Mm-hmm. The problem is that if every film wants that, then they're all directly competing against each other and none of them can make it. And then you leave September, October, November to vacant.
Yeah.
So some movies open September, October, November. Other movies wait till January when nominations happen. As the sort of art film world keeps getting further and further removed from just the general theatrical zeitgeist, and as audiences keep wanting to watch kind of nothing but franchise movies, it becomes a lot harder. And, so then you'll have films that deliberately wait to open for Oscar nominations, like September 5 or Nickel Boys, and then they don't get the nominations that they thought they would, or only a few of them, which then means they won't make the money they thought they would, and it becomes a vicious cycle.
Yeah. Yep.
I think it's mostly about consumers. I also think it's just part of modern life. I mean, so you and I are in a basketball league. We're both huge basketball fans. One of the biggest conversation topics about the NBA the last few years is, why are the ratings so far down? Why, what's wrong? Why aren't people enjoying the NBA? And, I listened to the Six Trophies podcast with Shea Serrano and Jason Concepcion. And I was listening to a new episode earlier today, and they put it succinctly. It's like the ratings are down for basketball because the ratings are down for everything. Mm-hmm. Because in 1994, there were 7 things on TV, and now there are 3,000 things on TV, 4 million things on YouTube. Everyone has Spotify. Everyone has 10 streaming services. It's like, what do you realistically expect in a different reality when there are 7 things to watch versus 7 million things to watch?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's fair. And I'm not trying to be the hot take guy, but I've been thinking a lot about this crop of Oscar nominees, especially compared to last year's, where I felt like they did a good job of capturing both really populist movies and also movies that built word of mouth throughout Oscar season. I'm hoping that's what we get this year, but it seems like the Oscars are always teetering on the brink of like complete implosion. And 2024 looks to be a crop of movies that may not help their case a lot when it comes to viewership and awareness. So I want to let me name the Best Picture nominees for this year. You've got Honora, The Brutalist, A Complete Unknown, Conclave, Dune Part 2, Emilia Perez, I'm Still Here, Nickel Boys, The Substance, and Wicked. Now, I would say that roughly half of these have broken through enough in the zeitgeist, in the mainstream, that people will have at least heard of them, right? Like A Complete Unknown, Conclave, Dune. I would say The Substance, it's such a big hit now, and Wicked for sure. The other 5 are, I think, trying to make their case. Some of these are definitely a surprise. And I'll kind of let you go ahead and tease your article today. What were the biggest surprises, both in terms of what made it and what didn't make it in this Best Picture crop? Best
Picture went pretty expectedly. I got 8 of the 10 right. I think most people got 8 of 10 right. The 2 surprises were I'm Still Here and Nickel Boys. Mm-hmm. The 2 movies that I think people most commonly predicted to be in those spots were A Real Pain and Sing Sing, with a few people also thinking September 5 would make it. I'd say it's somewhat surprising that A Real Pain isn't there, but I didn't think it was a sure thing because there were only 2 other categories that it was really expected to be a major player in, which were original screenplay and supporting actor, both of which it did get nominated for. But often when a film is only really going to be a factor in 2 other categories, it's hard to say the Best Picture support is truly there.
I think from year to year, and with this new Academy makeup that we have, it's both exciting and it's super frustrating because you can't really pigeonhole movies the way you used to be able to, right? Like, I loved A Real Pain. It was one of my favorite movies of the year. And I really thought that based on the kind of vibes it was giving off and the audience reactions I saw in person when I saw the film, I was like, oh, this is the holdovers for this year. This is going to slot right into that holdover spot and really make a play. And, they gave it the big September push. So I thought that it was in prime position for a traditional Oscar campaign. And that just apparently didn't work, whether it was the movie itself or the sort of traditional way it was being pushed. It really never caught on with Oscar voters. And I think as I look through this list of 10 movies, I'm trying to kind of parse out like, oh, this is this year's Killers of the Flower Moon, or this is this year's Oppenheimer. And it's both a good and a bad thing that nothing really seems to be mapping 1-to-1 in terms of what would make it in prior years.
Yeah, and something you said about the Academy has grown and it's certainly artier and certainly more international than it used to be. It's a double-edged sword because certainly that is manifest in the results. But in the old Oscar years, people used to complain every year about how many things got in that seemed like pure Oscar bait. I mean, some movies that come to mind are like The Reader and Cold Mountain and Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close. And movies like that don't get Best Picture nominations anymore. But that's a good thing because when they did, people complain every year, like who wants those movies? And so now it's movies that certainly have smaller audiences, but at least somebody does actually want them, even if that's a smaller number of people.
Well, I think that's a perfect segue into talking about perhaps the biggest lightning rod of this Oscars race, and that is Emilia Perez.
Yeah, that's the exception. I'm not sure who does want that.
So, folks, if you've not heard of Emilia Perez, it's a Netflix film. It is perhaps best known because of who's in it, and that is specifically Selena Gomez in a supporting role. She of $1 billion in makeup money now. So it's a very politically charged and I don't know, hot button topic movie that no one seems to like because it certainly would seem to check the what would be considered traditional liberal boxes of Hollywood. And yet the audience for whom it is apparently being made has pretty much wholesale rejected it as having really regressive ideologies. And then obviously anyone on the opposite side of the political spectrum from this movie is already not going to like it. It got mixed to negative reviews from most critics, and yet it has pretty much dominated awards season. Daniel, is it just because of the international makeup of the Academy now? Because this movie seemed to do well at the Globes too, but I don't think anyone could have seen this getting 13 Oscar nominations.
Well, so a slight correction there that really shocks me. When I was researching a piece I was writing the other day, I looked up the Metacritic score of Emilia Perez, which I expected to be really low. And it turns out the Metacritic score is 71, which is actually pretty high. And I confess I don't understand it because every critic I've actually seen or listened to speak about the film has not liked it. So I don't know where that 71 score comes from, but I believe it's accurate. I mean, it's not like I think anyone is nefariously manipulating scores over at Metacritic. I believe that score is mathematically correct. I just don't understand who those people are. And are they like in hiding or are they in critic witness protection because they don't want to admit to liking Emilia Perez?
Yeah, I don't know, man, but it definitely seems to be in pole position here. Nothing's really challenging it right now in terms of sheer numbers of nominations. The next highest nomination getters are Wicked and The Brutalist, tied for 10 nominations.
Well, and so sorry, one last thing about Emilia Perez. We should talk about, so you mentioned how a lot of people that the movie seems to be for don't seem to like the movie. And that's true, but there's the difference between, so it's a movie in Spanish and takes place in Mexico, but it was made by Europeans.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the pushback we're seeing on the movie comes from people of Latino descent. But I think a lot of the support for the movie is coming from the Europeans in the Academy.
That's fair.
Like the European aesthetic of the film.
Yeah, well, I think I've also seen a ton of pushback from the transgender community on this movie as well. And I, if I can try to map it to another recent nominee, I think this is really kind of filling the void of the triangle of sadness. How the hell did this movie get in the Best Picture race?
Yeah.
And again, this movie is certainly not a satire, but it has the cheekiness of a European-made film about issues of, Triangle of Sadness, it's issues of class and race. This movie, it's issues of gender and race. And I think that it's definitely performing better with non-American critics than it has with anyone I've seen in America.
Yeah. I mean, the way I've sort of explained Emilia Perez to people is it feels to me like Baz Luhrmann cosplay. And I don't like Baz Luhrmann. I haven't really liked any Baz Luhrmann films. So it makes sense that Emilia Perez also isn't working for me. But most Baz Luhrmann films do really well at the Oscars. I mean, a few years ago, Elvis got a lot of nominations.
Yep.
And I did not think Elvis was a good movie. But, there's obvious precedent that there are people in awards bodies that like Baz Luhrmann films, and so it makes sense that they also like Emilia Perez.
Well, since you've now outed yourself as a Baz Luhrmann detractor, I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'm going to say something that is probably going to get me drawn and quartered in film criticism circles. The Brutalist did not do it for me, man. I went to see it last week, and I was so incredibly pumped after that first half, and I will join the chorus of people who just say the second half landed with a real thud. I thought the epilogue that was tacked on at the end was really ham-handed and just did not work for me overall. It felt like an exercise in letterboxed bros making a movie that captures the form of films that they love without the real substance underneath it. I'm curious to hear what you thought of The Brutalist, because it seems like this is now a two-horse race between Emilia Perez and The Brutalist.
Yeah. So first of all, I'm going to disagree with the last thing you said. I think there are other films very much in the Best Picture race, and I wouldn't even say that those are the top two, but we can get to that later.
Okay.
The Brutalist I saw in Toronto. I've been meaning to see it again, so I've still only seen it the one time, which was 4 months ago now. I mostly agree with you that the ending didn't work. I would say I would be a little more generous and say it's 3/4 of a great movie than just half a great movie. I even thought that the first half of the second half of the movie was really great, the third quarter, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
I agree the ending did not work, but man, it's such a big swing. And the first half and even the first 3/4, I think, are so good and so just inspiring for the way a big swing should make you feel when you're watching it, that you sort of forgive it anything. I mean, I was listening to Sean Fennessy and Adam Naiman talk about it on the Best Picture. And what Adam Naiman said was that that Brady Corbet is the only person out there even trying to make a Francis Ford Coppola movie. And I thought that was a great way to phrase it, that like you watch it and you see the same ambition that you see in things like The Godfather and Citizen Kane and There Will Be Blood. And that's not to say that it lands as perfectly as any of those movies, but man, that ambition goes a long way to how you feel about it.
Yeah, for sure. And I don't want to be overly negative about the movie, but I feel like there is a crop of young filmmakers that are coming up now who have been equally raised on film history and Instagram. And so, you say, hey, I made my movie in VistaVision, as if that lends credence to the film itself. And I really appreciated some of the imagery in the movie, but it felt like a big exercise in worshiping at the altar of film without the actual religious experience of having a good movie presented to you at times. It really felt kind of hollow to me.
Yeah, I think in a way, watching The Brutalist is almost experiencing the art form of movies conceptually more than it is experiencing a singular movie.
Yeah.
I mean, even watching the trailer for The Brutalist, you just sort of feel like you're in the presence of something that is going for it.
Yeah, and people have talked for years about the A24 aesthetic, and I don't always buy into that stuff, but this might be the most A24 movie of all time. Like, it is marketed as an experience from A24, and I think it really does appeal to that sort of, again, I'll say the phrase, like the letterboxed bro who wants to experience a Francis Ford Coppola movie, and it just did not quite hit that height for me.
Yeah, I do want to see it again, because the ending really didn't work for me the first time I saw it. But now that I will go in with different expectations, I'm curious how it will land for me.
All right, if there's two movies that I think, for me, are kind of the dark horses in this race, or at least contenders in this race, I think Anora is still hanging around. Anora was the front runner back in October. It really seems to have fallen off and taken a back seat. I'll be interested to see what the campaign does from here. And call it the traditionalist in me, but I still think that Conclave might have a punch to land. It is by far, I think, the crowd pleaser of the bunch. If the boomers that are still represented in the Academy have anything to say, it just feels like a good old-fashioned, lots of dialogue, lots of scenery chewing. The problem with that is that Edward Berger didn't get a director nomination to back it up. So I'm curious to hear, you said that there are other movies in this list that you think could challenge. What is still on the radar for you?
Yeah, so if you want to go sort of inside baseball with how the Best Picture ballot works, of the 10 Best Picture nominees, it seems pretty clear that there are 6 of them that like really have a lot of support and 4 that don't have as much support. The 6 that really have a lot of support are Anora, The Brutalist, Conclave, A Complete Unknown, Wicked, and Amelia Perez. I would separate those 6 into 2 groups. The Brutalist, Amelia Perez, and Wicked are the 3 that I don't think can win Best Picture. Anora, Conclave, and A Complete Unknown are the 3 that I think can. And I would expect the Best Picture winner to be one of those 3.
Wow.
And the way I would describe the difference is the way the Best Picture preferential ballot works is, so there are 10 films and voters rank all 10, and then there are elimination cycles. For a film to survive and actually win Best Picture, 2 things need to happen. First, it needs to have a lot of first place votes. You can't survive the early eliminations without having a lot of first place votes. That's how we know something like Nickel Boys or I'm Still Here are not going to win Best Picture, because they're not going to have enough first place votes to survive the early eliminations. They're going to be the first films eliminated from the process. But once the early eliminations happen and we start getting deeper onto people's ballots, first place votes don't matter as much anymore at that point. What most matters is being last on the fewest number of ballots. So movies like The Brutalist and Amelia Perez and Wicked obviously have a lot of fans. They will get enough first place votes to survive those early eliminations. But I also think they have a lot of detractors, and they will be at the bottom of too many ballots to ultimately win, which is why I think either Anora, Conclave, or A Complete Unknown will be the winner, because those are the movies where 2 things are true. 1, they're going to have enough first place votes to get through the early eliminations. And 2, they won't be at the bottom of very many ballots. The one thing that's true of those 3 movies is no one really hates them. I mean, look, it's 2025 and the internet exists, so there are obviously people that hate them. But generally speaking, in a voting body of 10,000 people, those are the 3 films that don't really have many haters. So I think that the Best Picture will come from one of those 3.
Now, there is a lot of time for politicking and for campaigning over the next, 6 weeks until we get to the Oscars. If you had to put money down today on one of those 3, what do you think is, A, currently your pick for that? And B, what do you think is actually going to withstand the next 6 weeks of campaigning to come out on top?
Oof, man. Conclave seems like the safest bet purely because it's the one that I almost can't imagine what the backlash is going to be. Like Anora, you're going to get backlash about, like, is it the male gaze? There's already been the intimacy coordinator backlash. And A Complete Unknown, you're going to get the backlash, like, is it Oscar bait? Are music biopics good? Are they terrible? Is this like Bohemian Rhapsody all over again? And look, I hated Bohemian Rhapsody and I love Complete Unknown, so I don't think the movies are comparable. But there will be takes that they are comparable.
Yeah.
Conclave is the one where, like, I just kind of don't see what people are going to attack it from. In a way, it's, maybe the most boring is not the right word, because I think Conclave is a really good movie. It's probably the least challenging of the Best Picture nominees, other than, Wicked, which isn't really trying to be challenging. But that can work in its favor.
Do you think we still live in a world where you need a Best Director nomination to back up your Best Picture nomination to have a real shot?
Yes and no. I think that over the course of a decade, you probably have 9 years where the Best Picture winner also gets a Best Director nomination. But there are exceptions, in as long as it happens rarely, not getting a Best Director nomination can be actually a boon for a movie. I mean, we saw this happen with Argo in 2012, where there was such outcry that Ben Affleck didn't get a nomination that it made people like the film even more. And look, I love Argo. I think I'm even going to be on a podcast with you talking about Argo soon.
Yep.
But you have to acknowledge that a part of Argo's journey to the Best Picture microphone at the end of that Oscar night, a part of that journey was Ben Affleck not getting a director nomination. And that played directly into the campaign and the way people felt about the movie.
Yeah, for sure.
And particularly with Edward Berger and Conclave, I think it's really interesting that, so he also directed All Quiet on the Western Front 2 years ago. He did not get a Best Director nomination for that one either. And All Quiet on the Western Front and Conclave, together, those 2 movies got 17 Oscar nominations, and he didn't get a director nomination for either one. So that will speak to a feeling that this guy has not gotten his due, and that could help the movie.
Yeah, I mean, he and Denis Villeneuve can be hanging out in the Losers Club on Oscar night because, once again, Denis not nominated for a Dune film, which is, it was expected. It still shocks me. Like, I just don't really know what the guy has to do with his gigantic tentpole movie to earn himself some Oscar love. That's beside the point because I think we both agree Dune is absolutely out of the running here. Daniel, before I let you go, what I appreciated about your article was you also don't use this word snub. I don't like talking about snubs when it comes to the Oscars because it implies some sort of objective, collective truth and that someone was ignored instead of just there being a pool of really good people to choose from. With that said, what are some films or performances or whatever, what have you, that you wish you could have seen listed here today?
Yeah, I agree with you that I don't like the word snub because snub implies an agenda that I don't think is what's happening with 99% of Oscar omissions. Now, every once in a while, there is something I think is a genuine snub. The best example, I think, is last year when the French film A Taste of Things was left out of the Best International Film race. I think that was a genuine snub that I think people deliberately didn't vote for because they were so outraged that France chose that movie instead of Anatomy of a Fall. So it was a real sort of screw this movie kind of movement. That is a case where I think the word snub is fair to use. But for the most part, it's, I mean, like we said, the Academy has 10,000 members. And you got 10,000 people voting on their taste. And it's like, it's going to be weird. They're going to be weird results. The results won't make sense a lot of the time. But to say snub implies that you think people sort of like had this hidden agenda, which I think is almost never what's happening. In some ways, I think the best case to use the word snub isn't when people watched something and didn't like it, but rather when the evidence sort of suggests that people didn't watch a movie at all. So, to answer your question, what I really wish would have been there, to me, the best acting performance of 2024 in either lead or supporting any gender, just by far and away what I thought that was the performance of the year, was Marianne Jean-Baptiste in the British film Hard Truths.
I just saw it last night, and the movie didn't land for me as well as it did with others, but the performance absolutely did.
Yeah. And so she won Best Actress from every major critics group in the country. New York Film Critics, Los Angeles, Chicago, National Society of Film Critics. They all gave her Best Actress. I don't think that Academy members watched that movie and disagreed about her performance. I think they just didn't watch the movie. And that's a different problem. It's in some ways a more depressing problem. I will spare it from you in this podcast, but I have gone on rants online that I think the reason voters aren't watching that movie is because it is a movie about Black women. And I think for voting bodies that are largely white male, you can convince white men to watch movies about Black men. You can convince white men to watch movies about white women. I think it's hard to convince white men to watch movies about Black women. It feels too distanced from their experience. And I think a lot of the most surprising Oscar omissions in the recent years, whether it be Daniel Deadweiler for Till 2 years ago, whether it be The Woman King getting 0 nominations, whether it be Hard Truths today, whether it be Daniel Deadweiler in The Piano Lesson today, I think there's a real commonality of stories about Black women being ignored. And again, I don't think it's because voters are watching movies and thinking they aren't good. I think it's that voters just feel overwhelmed by their two watch stacks, and the movies that end up falling out of the rotation are the movies about Black women.
That's a good point. Yeah, I mean, I think that my pick for who I would have in the Best Actress lineup is someone who didn't even make a dent in awards season, but it was my favorite performance of the year just because it was so kind of deliciously scene-chewing, and that was Zendaya in Challengers. I thought that she absolutely knocked it out of the park in that movie, and it was a challenging role. She had to age from basically, I think, like 17 up to mid-30s, and the absolute command that she had at the center of that movie, I think she has a presence, a screen presence that exceeds both her experience and her years on screen. It made me really excited for what's to come with Zendaya.
Yeah, and I really liked Challengers. And, so Marianne Jean-Baptiste was the omission today that I was the saddest about. The one that I was the most purely shocked about was that Challengers didn't get nominated for either score or original song, both of which were by Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, both of which were outstanding. It won Best Original Score at the Golden Globes, which I would have thought would at least sew it up for a nomination.
Yeah.
But that didn't happen. And that was, I think, the biggest pure surprise of the morning.
Well, if we're talking about film Twitter stuff, I thought that it might sneak into cinematography as well. There's some really inventive camera work there.
Well, and same with editing, the way they assembled the tennis matches. I mean, it got blanked, and I was really surprised.
Daniel, I want to thank you for jumping on with us talking about the Oscars. You've gotten me re-excited about the Oscars after a day looking at a list of movies that I frankly didn't love this year. So tell us a little bit more about what you're writing. Where can we find you to get more excited about this Oscar season?
So like you said, I wrote two pieces for Roger Ebert this week. One was predictions of how the nominations would go, and then there was a piece today about what wasn't there and why, and sort of how it happened that way. I will be doing Oscar predictions for Roger Ebert the week before the show. Other than that, I'm not sure yet, but we'll see.
You can find Daniel on Twitter at Third Man Movies. Have you made the switch to Blue Sky yet?
Yes, I was just going to say I'm also at Blue Sky at the same address, Third Man Movies. Third spelled out THIRD.
Daniel Joyaux, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Bob. I appreciate it. Always fun to talk to you.
This episode is brought to you by Companion. Iris and Josh seem like the perfect match, but when a weekend getaway turns into a nightmare, Iris realizes that things aren't as perfect as they appear. From the creators of Barbarian and the studio that brought you The Notebook comes a twisted tale of modern romance and the sweet satisfaction of revenge. Companion, only in theaters January 31st. Rated R, under 17, not admitted without parent.
All right, we're joined once again by Mark McLaughlin from Old Line Spirits. Mark, it's been like a year and a half since we had you on the show. How's it going, man?
Hey, glad to be back. Things are going pretty well. Had 2024 was kind of a wild ride, and mostly in good ways, and churning away at 2025. So, things are moving in the right direction. We're good. How are you?
We're doing great, man. I was saying that it's good to actually see your face for the first time. We're chatting over Zoom. I don't know what happened last time, but you were reminding us that I think you were like at home in your bed or something the last time we talked. So, at least now you've got like the zip up Old Line vest on. You look like a professional.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And the listeners can take the bedroom thing however they want.
It was an interesting conversation to say the least.
Right. It just confirmed for me how sultry the sound of my voice must be, Brad. That's what it is.
Moving on from that.
I mean, listen, hey, so we've been going back through some of our past episodes, Brad. We've been updating a lot on our Film and Whiskey website, and we've been adding a lot of our old whiskey reviews as blog posts. And we've actually seen a lot of traffic on the site from some of these blog posts. And I just updated the last time we had Old Line on the show, we reviewed 3 of their whiskeys. So we did their Bottled and Bond, we did their Madeira cask finish, and their port cask finish. Now, in addition to those 3, we also had a separate episode with Mark, just kind of talking about the history of the brand, where we called out their Navy Strength 114 proof American Single Malt. And dare I say, Brad, it might be my favorite American Single Malt on the market right now.
Dude, it is bonkers how delicious Old Line Spirits 114 is. That Navy Strength just kicks ass, man. So I'm also like curious. So like Navy Strength is 114. Where would you put like Army Strength whiskey?
Oh man, well under 100. Right?
Oh, okay, that's what I figured.
Yeah.
That's like the whiskey that you can sell outside the liquor store because they've proofed it down to like 48 proof.
I was saying, does that mean that like Marine Strength is just like really stupid, but it's like 148 proof? Like
it's kind of like
way too much to handle.
Yeah. It's just very volatile,
Yeah.
So Mark is back to join us once again. He's brought along 4 different spirits for us to sample as we talk. But what we really brought him in for was this new development in the TTB world. Folks, we really don't get into the legality behind our products very often, but There's been
I feel like we should though, Bob. That's what everybody is looking for. Like, what is the legal world behind spirits?
I think we just try to cover it with the blanket statement, like, this is legal, trust me.
Yeah.
That's kind of what we typically do here. But the TTB recently designated American Single Malt as an official category in the world of spirits. And this has been something that's been brewing for a long time. There's been a lot of lobbying going on to get it recognized as an official category. Now, what does that mean for the average consumer? Brad, I don't know. You don't know. We just know that we're still drinking delicious whiskey. And so we've brought Mark along to kind of fill us in as average Joes on what this means for us, for our wallets, for the shelves and the selection that we might see, but also what it looks like for a producer of American Single Malt. So, Mark, we're going to be kind of tapping into your expertise today, man.
Yeah. Well, hey, no, happy to be here. And do you want to jump right into what you queued up there?
I mean, yeah.
All right. The category recognition has been something, like you said, that's been in the works for years. And one of the most interesting things about that, in my opinion, is that we as a category of producers, American Single Malt, we were all producing this thing we called American Single Malt whiskey. And we were all adhering to a definition that we all agreed to as a group of producers, but it didn't really exist, right? We were very, very broadly under the government rules called an American malt whiskey, which had a pretty wide range of definition. So we were all acting as if this existed and encouraging and pushing the government to place a definition around it. And one perspective on that, which was originally my perspective, was why would we encourage the government to come in and place any sort of definition on something that is right now we have more flexibility? Why encourage the oversight? And where I was convinced that I was wrong, and I think I was wrong, is that the government eventually was going to do this anyway. Probably not in 2024 without the big push, but eventually, as the category grows, they were going to do it. And who knows, without our input, what the definition would have been. Somebody well-meaning but not really well-versed in ASM might have just put forth some definition that really, really kind of screwed us. So
you mean you can't trust politicians to put categories on things they don't really understand?
Yeah, you'd be shocked. It's wild. So we proposed this, and as a group, like I said, we all got on the same page, and then it worked. It took longer than we expected, but it worked. And then so what that means for consumers in the near term, I don't think it means much more than an added layer of not respectability. What's the word I'm looking for? Just an added layer of this is a real thing. This is officially
legitimacy.
Legitimacy is a word I couldn't find. This is the first category of whiskey that the U.S. government has recognized in 52 years. That's a pretty big deal, we think. Now, I think what you're going to see is what that gives us as producers is now we have every business wants clarity. You always hear about when there's going to be changes to taxes or something like that. Whether they're good or bad changes, the businesses, they just want to know so they can plan and grow. So we know what this category now officially looks like, and we can grow from there, which is great. So, will you see American Single Malt whiskey categories in your local liquor store? Maybe, maybe not. I think you will eventually. But in the near term, I think it's just that little tailwind boost of hey, we're taking ourselves seriously, and so is the government, and so are the consumers.
Well, and it seems like it would also trickle down into things like a San Francisco spirits competition, right? Where now you have a formalized category of American Single Malt that you can win, best in show in and things like that. So it seems like it just expands the world. And at the end of the day, it gives the whiskey consumer more things to enjoy. And I think that's the beautiful element of giving it that designation is now I as a consumer get to become an expert in something that's brand new. And that's really fun.
Yeah, agreed. I couldn't agree more. And then, the beauty of the definition, the way it has become official, in my opinion, is that, what we didn't want to do when you look at the definition of single malt scotch or the definition of bourbon or rye whiskey here in America, those definitions make all the sense in the world, right? And they are pretty tightly defined, and that makes sense when you're a category that's been around for hundreds of years, right? You want to enshrine that so that newcomers don't, do something with the category of bourbon that you don't, that the industry and the consumers don't want, right? Do something wacky, call it a bourbon, and it hurts the name of bourbon. American Single Malt's in a different position. We're just starting out, so we want to have a wide enough aperture, if you will, or a wide enough list of options on what we can do with our whiskey that allows us to do something different than Scotch, different than bourbon, but also have guardrails on so it doesn't get too crazy. So that's really, I think, what was done. And a good example of that is, bourbon, as you guys well know, has to be aged in a virgin oak cask, as does American rye whiskey. American Single Malt can be aged in a virgin oak barrel or a used barrel. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter at all. It's allowed. And that's wonderful because you have certain places like, Virginia Distilling Company, they make wonderful whiskey down in Virginia, and they take a little bit more of an old world approach. And Old Line takes more of a new world virgin oak aging. We can both do that and be in the same category. Mm-hmm. And I think what you're going to see is, as the, up until now, I think that rum has probably had the widest breadth of flavors in any category. When you look at very, very funky rums from like Martinique to very, very sweet rums from, Puerto Rico or sometimes the Dominican Republic, places like that. Rum is just such a wide open category, which is great. I think American Single Malt is going to rival that for the amount of the breadth of flavors that you can get from a category because the definition was left, a little bit more open.
I think that's a good segue into talking about the spirits that you sent us to try today. And first of all, thank you for that. Any package that I receive that has 4 different kinds of alcohol in it is always greatly appreciated.
Let's go.
But like I said, I think we've tried 4 different spirits from you guys already. We have 4 more today. 3 of them are American Single Malt. One of them is a rum, which I know excites Brad because when he's not drinking whiskey, he's a rum guy. So, Brad, you're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mark is my new favorite distiller.
Yeah. So I think we should go ahead and dive into this flagship American Single Malt. This is 95 proof. And I guess my first question, Mark, is explain to me the difference between your flagship 95 and your bottled and bond, which is at 100. Aside from just the fact of, aging or proof point, is there any sort of different makeup to anything here? Or are we just trying to find a more approachable proof point for the 95?
It's a great question. There are kind of noteworthy differences. We produce our whiskey in 2 locations, as you guys may remember. We have the distillery that I'm sitting in now, where we have a 300-gallon pot still, and we work with Middle West Spirits in Columbus, Ohio, and we use their much, much larger column still and pot still for the stuff we produce out there. So we produce in 2 locations. Since we're talking about the category definition, or we're talking about that, it's important to note that we don't marry any barrels from Ohio with any barrels from Baltimore. That would run afoul of the definition. But as long as those barrels, stay Baltimore barrels, stay with Baltimore barrels as far as, blending and consumption, and Ohio barrels stay with Ohio barrels, then we're compliant. For a number of reasons, so the whiskey here is coming off a completely different still. It's double pot distilled. And we also age in, here in Maryland, most of the stuff we produce, we put into actually 30-gallon barrels, and everything else we do in Ohio, which is, a higher volume, goes into 53-gallon ASBs. So, and that came about by accident. We were phasing our way from small barrels up to the larger barrels, as a lot of distilleries do. And once we hit the 30s, we just loved the character. And we didn't want to let that go completely. We didn't want to just pass through that size towards 53s. We didn't want to let that go. So what we do here in Maryland mostly goes into 30s. And so that the bottled and bond was distilled here in our still, meets all the requirements, bottled and bond. And it was aged in a 30-gallon barrel, number 4 char, whereas what we're drinking at the 95 was aged in a 53-gallon ASB for a blend, and it's a blend of 4 to 8-year-old, which is also important because those profiles between 4 and 8 are dramatically different. And it's amazing how they kind of play together.
One of the things that we mentioned on the last episode with you guys was, and forgive me for the kind of crudeness of this comparison, but Brad, I love the bourbon-y character that's brought forth in their single malt. I think it's a fantastic gateway from bourbon drinkers into a new category. And I think it is that virgin oak that you guys use. It really does impart that sort of bourbon-y sweetness. Brad, we're going to give just general impressions of these because we want to respect Mark's time, but also we will give full reviews of all 4 of these products on our website. So go to filmwhiskey.com and you can find all these reviews. What immediately jumps out to me on the nose here, Brad, on this flagship, we have a tea that we drink when we're all sick in my house, and there are sick people in my house, and it's a lemon ginger tea. There's lemon and there is ginger on this, and it is super bright, and I am absolutely in love with this nose, man.
Yeah, it absolutely has some floralness to it that I really, really love. And yet, like you said, there's enough of that bourbon influence, not bourbon influence, enough of that cask influence that, man, like it has a little bit of vanilla and a little bit of caramel and enough to blend it all together. And then you drink it. And for me, it immediately goes into that really beautiful malty experience that I want out of any single malt from anywhere.
Yeah. Brad, I'm going to let you kind of dictate which is the next one that we drink. Do you want to jump immediately to the Navy Proof, which we've already said is freaking dope?
I always want to jump to the Navy Proof, Bob. I think it'd be good to jump into the Pedro Jimenez sherry cask finish, which I've already drank. Oh my God.
Yeah, one of the things I love about their experimentation process at Old Line is how many different finishes they're producing. So like I said, we've tried the port cask and the Madeira cask already. We're trying the sherry cask today. And I'm looking at their website and I thought, we have to be tapping out on all of their line, their portfolio at this point. Oh no, Brad. We've got a cognac cask finish, maple syrup cask, Moscatel, Armagnac, Sauterne, and rum cask finish that we can still work through. So Mark, you're invited back perpetually, my
anytime.
friend.
Count me in. I'll wear my welcome anytime.
Mark, tell me about the PX finish. Like, what was it about this specific line that made you go, oh, we need to turn this into something we're doing?
So it's been a kind of a long evolution, and I'll try to keep it as brief as I can. But when we started out our finishing process, I think we first put whiskey in a finishing barrel back in 2016, maybe. So right around the beginning of when we were kind of getting going, we went with Oloroso sherry, which we love. And that was the first one we did. It just seemed like kind of for us, an obvious first move, very commonly used style of barrel. And really we figured there was very little risk to doing it. Let's just see what happens. And we loved the result. So then we kind of opened up our aperture and decided that, there's a fine line, I think, as a distillery where, putting out new and different products, but also not coming across as like you're all over the map, right? So we made it a deliberate choice to kind of open up that aperture and order a couple barrels here, a couple barrels there to try out new things, test them out, see what people thought, see what we thought, see what was, financially, a marketable product. And then now we're kind of narrowing it down again. And we're taking the ones that we think are the biggest winners and making them slowly and surely into, ongoing releases. So the sherry finish, we did Oloroso, which we love. We still do love. And at one point, after having done the port casks and that kind of fruit bomb characteristic of those port casks, gave us a little bit more interest in PX sherry can be a little more fruity, a little sweeter than Oloroso. So it's not nearly as big and bold necessarily as one of those ports, but it's kind of a step in that direction. So we ordered some, and we absolutely loved it. We actually have more coming in soon, more barrels. So it was just a way of just taking that known factor of Oloroso and just nudging it in a different direction. And we were thrilled with the result. And actually, if I can share without going on too long, we actually also took a chance with these barrels to do an level of experimentation that we hadn't done before. Is these barrels come to us sealed with a little bit of liquid in them, a little of the wine, and there's an inert gas in there, argon or something, I believe, that keeps it stable. And then you have a choice. You can empty that or you can keep it in. And we had 4 barrels for this release. And we kept the wine in there, which was maybe a liter out of a 60-gallon barrel. So very, very minimal.
Right.
One we had emptied everything out, and then the other 2 were like a third and 2/3. And it was fun just to kind of see, every time we do one of these finishes, not only does it work, but what can we learn from this that we can then apply to the next thing when it's Madeira or whatever. So, and we actually found that the one with with all the wine emptied was actually our favorite.
Here's something I'm going to be bold. We just drank a few weeks ago, a month or two ago, the Bushmills 30 and Bushmills 29, which are both PX finishes. If you can't get your hands on Bushmills 29, which is thousands of dollars, I think that this is like the perfect substitute.
Oh man.
Tell me I'm wrong, Bob.
Here's the thing, dude. So we've tried 3 different cask finishes now. And when you already respect the baseline product that is being finished in something else, then you're kind of willing to go on a more experimental route, right? I'm looking at our old scores. I fell in love with the Madeira finish. I gave it a 45 out of 50. It was one of the highest scores I've ever given on this podcast.
Yeah.
You were not a fan of the Madeira finish, but we both know that apparently that's just a thing with the Madeira. That's not a thing with this baseline distillate here. So I love that you guys are willing to introduce people to like, hey, this is what Old Line looks like. Now come with me as we try finishing it in all these different casks. I think that this one here, the PX finish, it's crazy to go from the flagship to this because like the biggest thing I noticed was the difference in viscosity. Like this just had a much more syrupy mouthfeel to it. I don't know, Brad, if I would say that it tops the Madeira finish for me, but it's like right there, man. This is a damn good finished whiskey.
Yeah, and it's if you haven't gotten into PX finishes, this might not always sound great, but it's the pruniness of it that like is so freaking good. And I know prunes are not the favored thing, fruit of the stone fruits, but man, oh man, it leaves you with such a richness of flavor. I like truly, I hope I'm not overstepping. Normally we never compare whiskeys when we're talking to a distiller to another company. I truly think that this is worth way more money than you're charging for it. The price on this PX finished is incredible.
Well, I appreciate that. And, we make a very conscious effort to keep our pricing as we even though we're a single malt whiskey, so many of our early adopters are bourbon drinkers. And, granted, bourbon prices have gone out to lunch in the past few years, but they're starting to come back down. But we thought like, I like to spend, 45 to 65 bucks is my sweet spot on a bottle of whiskey. I mean, sometimes above, obviously there's certain things below that. You can find some great deals below that. That's kind of like, generally speaking, where a lot of what I buy is. And I'm like, and I think for bourbon drinkers, a lot of the big brands vacated the consumer and moved up market because demand was high and left that. So we're like, you know what? Like our margins are way lower than a big bourbon producer. A, our grain is more expensive, and B, we're tiny. But we're going to put it there, and that's what we think it should be. And someday as we get some things that are a little bit more rare, maybe we'll go up for certain things. But really, that sweet spot is, if we feel that's kind of where we want to shop. And I'd much rather sell it there and have you say, wow, what a deal I got, and make a few extra bucks. To me, that's better in the long run for everybody.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, like finish is an important part of any whiskey tasting experience. And like when I walk away from drinking a bottle of whiskey and go, man, I only paid X amount of dollars for that. Like that is the best finish any distiller can leave on a consumer's financial palate.
I like the way, yeah, absolutely. Right. Yeah. You want people to, that you nailed it. Like the purchase should be good from beginning to end and after, just like, hey, I want another bottle of that because that was a good deal. And I was pleased,
Well, guys, let's jump into this Navy strength. And then Brad, I think what we'll do is we will review the rum as a bonus review on the website, and we'll keep this totally whiskey centric. We haven't actually given a full review of Navy strength, aside from just saying it is awesome. And I think if you're a listener of this podcast, like that should be enough for you to go get it at this point. We've reviewed a lot of whiskeys on this podcast, and I'm telling you, this is an awesome whiskey. But Brad, as we dive into the 114, let's just give a few notes here. What are you picking up on this one on the nose?
Man, I mean, it's got the maltiness that's all there. I think that what hits me, there's like a rich vanilla bomb for me that just there's a depth to it that you don't often find on other single malts.
Yep. Yeah, we talk all the time about how if you go to Scotland and you're sampling whiskeys at distilleries, it's really easy to find cask strength or quote unquote foolproof Scotch in Scotland. You can't really get high proof Scotch in America. And so, I think that this single malt is scratching my itch for high proof single malt. But it combines for me the best of like American craft whiskey. It has that just like American craft note that we get sometimes, Brad. You know what I'm talking about? There's like a distinct herbal note we get on craft whiskey. But it's coupled with that incredible maltiness that we love in our single malts. And it's like the perfect marriage of those two. And I mean, to Mark's point, it's $55. There's nothing on the market that is competing with this right now. It's like insane value and insane quality married together.
Yeah. Yeah, truly. If you can get your hands on their Navy Strength, it will be one of the best bottles you have on your shelf at any given time.
Man, you guys keep talking. I love it.
This is how we're trying to coax you back. Keep sending us finishes and stuff. Man.
Done, man. I'm a sucker for it. Guys, I can't thank you enough for those comments. And we love this Navy Strength. And where we originally we call it our blue label because it's a blue label. And the blue label used to be a cask strength, which ranges from 123 to 126 or so. And we certainly didn't want to vacate the cask strength, but we wanted to actually make our cask strength program a single barrel program. So we decided, Arch and I decided, a year or 2 or 3 ago, whatever it was, that, we love our cask strength, but he and I were almost always putting a drop of water in it or an ice cube just to kind of bring it down a little bit. We're like, we're probably drinking this thing in the mid 1-teens anyway. So we love that. We just think it shines at that kind of 114-ish range. And then also, we're Navy guys and no one's really doing Navy strength whiskey. There's a few 114s out there like, Old Grandad, but they don't label it as Navy strength. So all those reasons were like, hey, this just seems like a slam dunk. And then now we've opened up our we call it our black label, which is our single barrel cask strength. So not only like store picks, but also we'll do, like, we're releasing a Mark founder pick here like next week, I think. This 114 has been such a big win for us. And one thing that has changed since we last spoke is I'll shamelessly plug that we can actually ship to like 41 states now.
That's awesome, man.
On our website, if anybody is listening and wants to pick up any of the bottles, and we have free shipping on 3 or more bottles. So yeah, if people are interested in grabbing it, you can go right to our website, and it basically is fulfilled via a third party in Washington, D.C. But that's been really, really great for us that people can, experience what you guys, basically experience what you're tasting if they want to taste it themselves.
Well, Mark, we can't say enough good things about you or the brand. Thank you so much for joining us. Before you go, I want you to just give like your 30-second elevator pitch to bring it back to the category. For people who are listening to the podcast who really only drink bourbon, maybe dip their toe in rye once in a while, single malts, it's a step, man. It really is a leap of faith for a lot of people because they're just not used to the category. Psych us up a little bit. Convince us. Why should we be trying American Single Malt?
Absolutely. So I dearly love the categories of bourbon, rye, single malt scotch, blended. I love them all, right? And they all bring different things to the party. One thing I've noticed in the past, especially 10 years, that bourbon has taken on such a massive outsized role in the market where, as much as I love bourbon, there's a lot of people who only drink bourbon. And I think they don't realize that there's so many, the things that they love about that bourbon can be found in other categories and often in ways that they never could have really imagined. So for us, we're not trying to displace any category. It'd be silly that we never could if we wanted to. But for American Single Malt, I think most of us look at it as, for if you guys have your 7 or 8, kind of go-tos you reach for pretty often. We want to be one of those. We want an American Single Malt to be in that rotation because I think that the flavors, if you look at I think of like a blending board for like a DJ or something, like all the flavors for the most part are going to be very similar or the same as what you deliver in a bourbon. It's just there are different levels, right? So you can get those, and we just offer something that other categories can't. And I think it's go to your local whiskey bar and hey, pay $8, $10, $15 to try something new. If you like it, go to the store and buy it. And that goes for the whole category. Old Line, others. There's amazing American Single Malts out there, and I'm excited that people are starting to really see what's out there and available at a great value in many cases.
Yeah, and Mark, like you would be a regular on our podcast because Bob and I say that all the time. Like, just try things. Like there are so many whiskeys. Like, go to your whiskey bar, give it a shot. It's there for a reason. Use it to try new things, have new experiences. And I can guarantee you, if you try Old Line spirits, it will not be a waste of your money. You will have an awesome experience, and it will be well worth your time.
Brad, I learned a fun fact today. I did not know this until today. Mm-hmm. There are currently more distilleries producing single malt in America than in Scotland.
Yeah, so if you suck it, Scotland.
I was going to say, if you truly believe in American exceptionalism, if you really think that we're number one, then you need to be trying some American single malt. Guys, this has been Mark McLaughlin from Old Line Spirits. Mark, it's great to catch up with you. Congratulations on the entire portfolio. Congratulations on the TTB designation. Come back and join us soon, man.
Hey, you guys, thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure. And thank you all so much. I'm here. Whatever you need, let me know.
We'll be back on Tuesday with another regularly scheduled episode. But until then, I'm Bob Book.
I'm Brad G.
And we'll see you next time.